Welcome to Crimson Legacy Historians, where the past is not just remembered, but brought back to life with depth and clarity. She knocked on the gates of a vampire king's castle selling roses to help her sick mom. But when the iron doors opened and the poor girl stepped inside, she saw a portrait that made her heart stop. "Why is my mom's photo in your house?" she asked the immortal ruler in the black crown. What he said next didn't come at all, because his lips parted, then froze, as if the night itself had forgotten how to breathe. The moon hung low and silver above Nocturith, as Amara Wells walked slowly through streets. The living avoided after dusk. She was only 6 years old, but she carried herself with the weight of someone far older. Her feet etched from hours of walking on frost-slit cobblestones, and her stomach had been empty since morning. She didn't complain. Every step she took was for her mother, Lillian, who lay sick at home in their cramped room, burning with fever and needing medicine they couldn't afford. Selling roses was all Amara could do. She went from house to house, knocking on wooden doors and iron gates, hoping someone would buy something. Most people turned her away. A few whispered prayers and hurried inside, afraid to be seen helping a child out so late. She didn't give up. Her mother had always told her to stay strong and never stop trying. Then she saw the biggest gate she'd ever seen. Behind it stood Valamont Castle, a towering fortress of stone and shadow with high-arched windows, gargoyle sentries, and walls clawed thick with ivy. She stood still, staring for a moment. The castle looked like something from a nightmare made beautiful. But there was something haunting about it, too. It was too quiet, too, like a held breath waiting to be released. Amara took a deep breath and walked to the gate. She pressed the cold bell rune embedded in the stone. Seconds passed, and Amara thought maybe no one would answer. Then she heard a voice like winter itself, deep and ancient, crackling through the air. "Who comes to Valon after dark?" Amara cleared her throat, trying to sound braver than she felt. Hello, sir. My name is Amara. I'm selling roses. They're night blooms, the kind that open under the moon. Would you like to buy some?" There was a long silence. Amara waited, her basket of thin-stemmed roses clutched in both hands. She was about to walk away when the voice spoke again, softer this time, almost curious. "How much?" Amara's face brightened with fragile hope. "3 roses for a silver coin, sir, or the whole basket for 5. They're very fresh, I promise." Another paused. Then the voice said, "Wait there." Amara waited by the gate, shifting the wicker basket from one frozen hand to the other. Her arms were tired and her throat was dry. She hadn't had water in hours. But if this king bought her roses, she could buy her mother's medicine tonight. That thought kept her standing strong. After what felt like forever, she heard footsteps echoing across stone. The gate groaned loudly and slowly swung inward, iron teeth pulling apart like a mouth opening in the dark. A tall figure stood before her. He wore a black cloak edged in gold thread, a crown of iron thorns resting on hair the color of winter wheat. His skin was pale as candlelight, and his eyes burned like embers in a dying fire, red and ancient and unbearably sad. His face was sharp and handsome, but there was something in it that looked carved from sorrow. This was King Darius Valamont, though Amara didn't know his name yet. He looked down at the little girl in her faded red dress and worn shoes. For a moment something strange flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or recognition of something he couldn't name. "Come in," he said quietly, his voice gentler than she expected. Amara hesitated. Her mother had always warned her never to go into strangers' homes, especially not the homes of creatures from the old stories. But the man didn't look dangerous. He looked lonely and very, very tired. "It's all right," Darius said, seeing the worry written across her small face. "I'll buy all your roses. You can stand right here by the entrance if you're frightened. All of them." Amara's eyes went wide with shock. She had 16 roses in her basket. That would be more than 5 silver coins, more money than she usually made in a whole week. Yes, all of them. Darius reached into his cloak, but then he stopped and looked at her more carefully. His ember eyes softened. "When did you last eat, child?" Amara's stomach growled loudly, answering for her. She felt her cheeks burn hot with embarrassment and looked down at her worn shoes. Darius's stern expression cracked just slightly. "Come inside. Let me get you something warm to eat first. Then I'll pay you for the roses." Amara knew she shouldn't go in, but she was so hungry it hurt, and the king's voice, though strange and cold as stone, held no cruelty in it. She nodded slowly and followed him through the gate. The courtyard was even more haunting up close. Stone fountains stood silent and dry. Roses, night-blooming roses, grew in wild tangles along the walls, their petals black and crimson under the moonlight. A smooth stone path led to the castle's massive front doors. Everything looked frozen in time, like a place where seasons forgot to change. Darius opened the great doors, and Amara stepped inside. She gasped out loud. The castle was enormous. The ceiling soared so high she had to tilt her head all the way back to see the chandeliers, crystal and iron, holding candles that burned with flames that never seemed to flicker. The floors were polished black marble, smooth as mirrors. Velvet tapestries hung from the walls, showing battles and moonlit forests and crowned figures long forgotten. Gold-framed paintings lined the corridors. Everything was beautiful and cold and perfect, but the castle felt empty, not empty of things. There were more treasures here than Amara could count, but empty of life. There were no sounds of laughter, no voices, no warmth, just silence so thick it pressed against her ears like water. "Wait here," Darius said, gesturing to a carved wooden chair near the entrance. "I'll bring you something to eat." Amara sat down very carefully, afraid she might dirty the chair with her threadbare dress. Her eyes moved around the great hall, taking in everything. This was what power looked like. This man, this king, had a castle, immortality, probably more wealth than he could ever spend. But why did he look so sad? Why did his home feel like a tomb? Then Amara saw it on a stone pedestal near the grand staircase. Lit by a circle of candelabras, hung a portrait in a massive gilded frame. The frame was ornate, carved with roses and crescent moons, and looked like it cost more than her entire neighborhood. But the painting inside was what made her heart stop. Amara stood up slowly and walked closer, her small feet silent on the marble. Her heart began to beat faster and faster, loud enough she thought the whole castle might hear it. The woman in the portrait looked younger and healthier than Amara remembered, dressed in a gown of midnight silk, embroidered with silver thread, her pale hair flowing like water over her shoulders. She wore a calm, gentle expression, her eyes gazing out as if looking towards some distant hope. But there was no mistaking that face. It was her mother. Amara reached out with one small hand, fingers trembling, and touched the edge of the golden frame. Her voice came out barely louder than a whisper, but in the silence of that vast hall, it carried like a bell. "That's my mom." The tray in Darius's hands trembled, just barely, just enough that the crystal glass of water caught the candle light and fractured it into a dozen shaking stars. He stood frozen at the corridor's edge, watching the small girl in the faded red dress reach toward a portrait he'd spent centuries trying to forget. "That's my mom." 3 words spoken in a child's voice, clear and certain as a bell at dawn. 3 words that shattered 200 years of silence. Darius crossed the hall in 3 long strides, moving with the unnatural speed of his kind, and set the tray down on the pedestal with a sharp clack that made Amara jump. She spun to face him, her hand still raised toward the painting, her eyes wide but unafraid. "Her name," Darius said, his voice tight and controlled. Each word measured like a confession pulled from stone. "Was Lillian is." Amara corrected him, small chin lifting. "Her name is Lillian. She's not dead. She's sick, but she's alive. She's my mama." The candles in the chandeliers above flickered as if struck by a wind that didn't exist. Darius stared at the child, at her pale hair, the exact shade of wheat under moonlight, at the shape of her eyes, wide and storm-colored, at the stubborn set of her jaw. Features he knew, features he'd loved. "Come with me," he said quietly. "We need to talk." Darius led Amara through a maze of corridors to a smaller chamber. A gallery lined with shelves of ancient books and walls hung with fading tapestries. A fireplace burned low in the corner. Its warmth, a rare concession in a castle built for creatures who didn't feel the cold. He gestured to a cushioned chair near the fire and placed the tray of food, bread, cheese, dried fruit, the glass of water on a small table beside it. Amara climbed into the chair, her feet dangling above the floor. She picked up the bread and bit into it like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be full. Darius watched her eat with an expression caught somewhere between anguish and wonder. "Your mother?" he said carefully, sitting across from her in a high-back chair that looked more like a throne. "Tell me about her." Amara chewed and swallowed, then spoke between bites. "She's kind. She makes medicines from plants, herbs, and flowers and roots. People come to our room sometimes when they're sick and can't afford the doctors. She helps them for free, even though we don't have much." She paused, her small face growing sad. "But now she's the one who's sick. She has a fever that won't break. She doesn't remember things from before. Before I was born, she says her memories only go back 6 years. Darius's hands tightened on the arms of his chair, fingers pressing into the carved wood hard enough to leave marks. 6 years, he repeated, his voice hollow. "She has nightmares sometimes," Amara continued, not noticing the way the king's face had gone even paler. "She wakes up crying, holding this old locket. It has a moon carved on it. She doesn't know where it came from." Darius closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they burned with something that looked almost like pain. "I gave her that locket," he said quietly, "the night I asked her to stay with me forever." Amara stopped chewing. She set down the bread and looked at him with those two knowing eyes. "You knew my mama." "I loved her," Darius said, and the admission seemed to cost him something vital. He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back in a posture of rigid control, the bearing of a king who'd learned long ago to bury his heart beneath etiquette and ice. His black cloak, edged in gold thread, swept the floor behind him like folded wings. "I met Lillian in the shadow forest," he continued, his voice distant now, like he was recounting someone else's story. "She was gathering moonloom herbs by starlight, flowers that only open in darkness, flowers that have certain properties. I thought she was a dream at first. No mortal ventured that deep into the woods, not with the wolves and worse things that hunted there. What happened?" Amara whispered. "I saved her from a pack of dire wolves. She thanked me by laughing, and telling me I looked too grim for someone who'd just done a good deed." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and went like smoke. "We met in secret after that, every new moon, in a clearing where the night blooms grew wild. She taught me the names of flowers. I taught her that monsters could be gentle if given a reason." He turned to face Amara, his ember eyes fierce and aching. "I commissioned that portrait the night I planned to ask her to stay, to choose this life, to choose me. Despite everything I was, the painter worked through the night, and when dawn came, his voice cracked. She was gone. No message, no goodbye, just gone." "She didn't leave you," Amara said with a child's blunt certainty. "My mama wouldn't do that. She doesn't even remember you, but I can tell she wouldn't just leave someone she loved. I searched for her," Darius said, "for years, decades, but the trail went cold. My advisors, the Vampire Council, told me to let her go. Said she betrayed me, that mortals always fear us in the end." His jaw tightened. Elder Markellis, the head of the council, was particularly insistent. He said, "Loving a human made me weak, unfit to rule." "That's stupid," Amara said fiercely. "Loving someone doesn't make you weak." Darius looked at her, truly looked at her, and something in his ancient heart cracked open. "No," he agreed softly, "it doesn't." He knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level despite every court protocol that said a king should never kneel. "Amara," he said, his voice urgent now, "if your mother is alive, if she truly doesn't remember, something happened to her, something was done to her." The council, a sharp crack, split the air. Both of them turned toward the window. A raven, huge and black as spilled ink, had struck the glass with enough force to leave a spiderweb cracks. It clung to the stone sill outside, its eyes gleaming red in the firelight. Tied to its leg was a small scroll sealed with wax the color of dried blood. Darius rose slowly, his hand moving to the hilt of a blade concealed beneath his cloak. "Stay behind me," he told Amara. He opened the window. The raven hopped inside, dropped the scroll on the floor, and flew back into the night with a harsh cry that sounded almost like laughter. Darius picked up the scroll and broke the seal. His face went completely still as he read, the kind of stillness that comes before violence. "What does it say?" Amara asked, climbing down from the chair. Darius looked at her, then at the portrait visible through the open gallery door. Lillian's painted face watching them across the centuries. "It says," he replied, his voice colder than winter iron, "the scent returns, the bloodline stirs, the council will convene at midnight." He crumpled the message in his fist. "Someone has been watching us. Someone knows you're here." And in the castle's shadowed halls, the candles began to flicker one by one, as if something ancient and hungry had just woken from a very long sleep. The crumpled message burned in the fireplace, edges curling black as the wax seal hissed and spat. Darius stood before the flames, his silhouette sharp as a blade against the light, while Amara watched from the doorway with her small hands twisted in her dress. "They know you're here," Darius said, not turning around. "The council, they always know. Are you going to send me away?" Amara's voice was small but steady. Darius turned to face her in the firelight. His eyes looked less like embers and more like wounds. "No," he said, "but I need to understand what happened. What was done to your mother, and I need to understand it quickly." He crossed to her and offered his hand. "Come with me." The Hall of Records lay deep in the castle's eastern wing, behind a door carved with symbols that made Amara's eyes water when she tried to read them. Inside, the air smelled of old parchment and dried ink and secrets kept too long. Shelves stretched toward a vated ceiling, crammed with scrolls and ledgers and books bound in leather so ancient it looked like stone. Darius moved with purpose, his cloak sweeping across the dusty floor as he pulled volumes from high shelves with practiced ease. He spread them across a wide oak table beneath a candelabra, the pages crackling as he turned them. "Here," he said, pointing to a sketch rendered in fading charcoal. This was Lillian's shop. Amara climbed onto a chair and leaned over the drawing. It showed a small building with a painted sign, Wells Apothecary, and windows filled with hanging herbs. A figure stood in the doorway, smiling, her hair tied back with a ribbon. "She looks happy," Amara whispered. "She was," Darius said quietly. "She loved her work. I love helping people." He turned more pages, revealing sketches of the shadow forest, maps marked with small crescent moons, receipts for rare ingredients, evidence of a life carefully documented. Then he stopped at a page that held a letter unfinished. The ink faded to brown. "My dearest Lillian, the council grows suspicious. They watch my movements, question my absences. I can no longer meet you in the clearing without risking your safety. I have a proposal, one I should make on bended knee, with better words than these. Come to Valamont. Let me offer you sanctuary within these walls. Let me offer you everything I have, everything I am." Let me. The letter ended there mid-sentence as if the writer had been interrupted or had lost his nerve. "You never sent it," Amara said. "I planned to give it to her the night of the portrait," Darius replied, his jaw tight, "but she vanished before dawn. I thought." He closed his eyes. "I thought she'd seen what I truly was, immortal, unchanging, wrong, and decided she couldn't bear it." Amara shook her head firmly. "Mama doesn't remember any of this. When I ask about my papa, she just looks sad and says she doesn't know. She can't remember anything from before I was born, only the last 6 years." She reached into the collar of her dress and pulled out a thin chain. Dangling from it was a tarnished silver locket, small enough to fit in a child's palm. "Only this. She says she woke up with it 6 years ago in a room she didn't recognize, and she's kept it ever since." Darius went utterly still. Then slowly he reached out and took the locket in his fingers, cradling it like something holy or heartbreaking. He pressed the tiny clasp and it opened with a soft click. Inside was a miniature engraving, 2 crescents intertwined, forming a circle that held a single star. "I had this made," he said hoarsely. It was the night I planned to ask her. The crescent represent mortal and immortal, two halves meant to meet. The star, his voice broke. The star was the hope we might create something neither of us could make alone. Amara looked from the locket to his face. You were going to marry her. Yes, then someone took her away from you. Darius's ember eyes blazed. Yes. He stood abruptly and led Amara back through the corridors to the great hall, moving so fast she had to run to keep up. They stopped before the massive portrait, that gilded frame catching the candle light like trapped sunshine. Darius knelt beside Amara, bringing himself to her level, both of them staring up at Lillian's painted face. Amara reached out and traced the edge of the portrait with one small fingertip, following the line of her mother's cheek, the fall of her hair. She looks like she's waiting for something, the girl whispered. She was waiting for a future that never came. Darius said he studied Amara's profile, the angle of her nose, the shape of her ears, the way she tilted her head when thinking. Features he knew by heart. How old are you, Amara? 6, almost 7, 6 years, the same amount of time Lillian could remember. Someone didn't just take her, Darius said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and cold. Someone broke her, stripped her memories, left her with nothing. But he stopped, a terrible realization dawning across his face, left her with just enough memory. Raise a child, why would someone do that? Amara asked. Before Darius could answer, hurried footsteps echoed through the hall. A thin man in a dark servant's livery appeared, his face ashen and sheen with sweat. He bowed so low his forehead nearly touched his knees. Forgive the intrusion, your majesty, but speak Renz, Darius commanded. Rising to his full height, the steward Renz glanced at Amara, then back to the king, his hands shaking. The council has sent word. They demand an audience at midnight. Elder Marcellus himself is coming. Let him come, Darius said coldly. My lord, there's more. Ren's voice dropped to barely a whisper, thick with fear or guilt or both. When the child arrived, I saw her face beside the portrait. I knew, I've known for years. Darius moved so fast Amara didn't see it. One moment standing beside her, the next gripping Renz by the collar and lifting him off the ground. Know what? That Lillian Wells didn't flee. Renz choked out that she was taken. Elder Marcellus, he gave the order himself. He said she had to be removed, hidden away because she carried something dangerous. He called it. The steward's eyes slid to Amara, wide with terror. He called it a child of twilight, a child the prophecies warned against. A child who could finish your sentence, Darius said, his voice laced with barely leashed violence. Renz whispered, a child who could break the council's hold on this kingdom, who could walk between night and day, who could make us mortal again. Darius released him. Renz crumpled to the floor, gasping. The king turned to Amara, his face carved from ice and fury, and in his eyes was the terrible understanding of a truth too long buried. They didn't just take your mother, he said. They've been hunting you since before you were even born. Renz fled the hall. The moment Darius released him, his footsteps echoing like a frightened heartbeat against stone. Amara stood very still beside the portrait, her small hand clutching the locket at her throat. Am I in danger? She asked quietly. Darius knelt before her, meeting her eyes, storm gray and unflinching, despite the fear he could smell rising from her skin. Yes, he said, because she deserved honesty, even when it tasted like ash. But I won't let them take you. I failed your mother once. I won't fail you. He stood and offered his hand. There's something I need to show you. Something that will explain why they're afraid of you. The royal library was a cathedral of knowledge, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls lined with books bound in leather, iron, and things that might once have been skin. Darius led Amara to the far end, where the oldest volumes rested on pedestals behind glass that hummed with protective enchantments. He unlocked one case with a key that hung on a chain around his neck, and withdrew a book so ancient its cover was cracked like dried earth. The title was embossed in silver that had tarnished to black. Codex Nox, the Book of Knight's Laws. This contains the oldest prophecies, Darius said, setting it on a reading table carved from a single piece of obsidian. Laws written before the first vampire council, before kingdoms, before we forgot what we were running from. He turned pages carefully. each one crackling like a whispered secret until he found what he sought. The text was written in an old tongue, but beneath it someone had added a translation in crimson ink. Amara climbed onto the chair beside him and read aloud, her voice halting over the difficult words. When mortal sun and deathless moon join as one, a child shall be born of twilight's vein, blood that walks between night and day, neither wholly alive nor forever dead. This Bridgeorn shall bear 3 marks, the touch that wakes what sleeps, the flesh that withstands what burns, and the voice that commands what was commanded. In their rising, the covenant of fear shall break, and the lords of night shall face a choice, yield the throne or face the dawn. Darius's finger traced the words as she read them, his expression carved from granite and grief. The council has feared this prophecy for centuries, he said. A child who could end their power, our power, a ruler who could unite mortals and immortals under one crown. He looked at Amara, a Bridgeborn, but that's just a story. Amara whispered, though her voice wavered. Is it? Darius gestured to the candelabra beside them, its flames burning bright and hot. Touch the candle. Amara hesitated, then slowly reached out. Her small fingers passed through the flame, and she didn't flinch. The fire bent around her hand like water, warm but not burning. Vampires can't bear flame without pain, Darius said quietly, yet you feel nothing. He drew a silver letter opener from his desk and placed it in her palm. She held it without trembling, without the sickness that silver brought to creatures of night. And the 3rd mark, Darius continued, standing and walking to a withered plant in a clay pot, a night bloom that hadn't opened in years. Touch it. Amara set down the opener and reached toward the plant. The moment her fingertips brushed the dry stem, something shifted. The stem straightened. Color flooded back into gray leaves, and slowly, impossibly, a bud formed at its tip and unfurled into a deep crimson flower. Amara gasped and pulled her hand back, but the bloom remained alive and breathing in a room where nothing should grow. The touch that wakes what sleeps, Darius said, his voice thick with wonder and dread. You're not just Lillian's daughter, Amara. He turned to face her, and in his ancient eyes she saw the truth before he spoke it. You're mine as well. You're the child we would have made, the child the council tried to prevent. Amara stared at him, this pale king with his iron crown and ember eyes, and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. You're my father. I believe so, Darius said softly. The timing fits. 6 years ago, Lillian disappeared. 6 years ago, you were born. They didn't kill her because they needed her alive to carry you, to raise you, to keep you hidden until they could find you both. And he stopped, his jaw tightening until they could eliminate the threat. Amara's eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from the sudden weight of understanding. Mama doesn't remember because they made her forget. They took her memories so she couldn't find you, so she couldn't tell you about me. Yes, a long silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft crackle of candles and the whisper of old pages settling. Can monsters be fathers? Amara finally asked, her voice very small. Darius knelt again, bringing himself to her level, and for the first time in 2 centuries, his carefully controlled expression cracked open into something raw and human. Monsters, he said, are what our choices make us, not what our teeth do. I have done monstrous things to keep this kingdom standing. But if you're truly mine, his voice broke, then I choose to be whatever you need me to be, even if it means learning how to be something other than a monster. Amara reached out and touched his face, this cold, immortal thing, and found tears on his cheeks that glimmered like silver. A shout erupted from the corridor outside. The library doors burst open, and 2 of Darius's guards dragged in a struggling figure dressed in servant's gray, a young man with wild eyes and ink-stained fingers. We caught him in the rookery, Your Majesty, one guard said, shoving the prisoner to his knees, sending messages. The other guard held up a bundle of parchment, each sealed with red wax. He broke one open and read aloud. The girl stands before the portrait. She bears the marks. Prepare the taking. Dawn of the 7th day. Darius rose slowly, fury radiating from him like winter cold. How many did you send? The spy said, nothing, just smiled, a terrible zealot smile. Darius's hand moved to the sword at his hip. "How many?" "Enough," the spy whispered. "Elder Marcellus knows. The council knows, and they are already coming for her." The spy was dragged away to the dungeons, still smiling that terrible knowing smile. Darius stood in the library center, surrounded by ancient prophecies and flickering candles, his hand white-knuckled on his sword hilt. "How long?" he asked the guards who remained. "How long until the council arrives?" "Marcellus' last raven was sent at dusk, my lord," one answered. "If he rides with his full retinue, they'll reach the gates by midnight tomorrow, less than a day." Less than a day to prepare for war with his own council. Darius looked at Amara, who stood very still beside the obsidian table, her small face pale but resolute. "We need to move the portrait," he said abruptly. "If they come for you, they'll destroy anything connected to your mother, any proof that you exist, that this bond exists." He strode from the library with Amara hurrying behind, back through the corridors to the great hall where Lillian's portrait hung in its gilded frame. The candle light seemed dimmer now, as if the castle itself sensed the coming storm. "Help me," Darius said, reaching up to lift the massive frame from its hooks. But the portrait had hung there for decades, and the frame had settled into the stone. As Darius pulled, one corner caught on a metal bracket. The gilded edge sliced across his palm, deep enough that blood welled up immediately, dark and gleaming, the color of garnets in shadow. A single drop fell, spinning through the air like a tiny crimson star. Amara, standing directly below, instinctively reached out and caught it in her cupped palm. Darius froze, horror flooding his face. "No, don't," but it was too late. Vampire blood burned mortal flesh like acid. It was a law as old as their kind, a barrier that kept the two worlds separate. Darius had seen humans scarred by mere drops, had watched brave warriors scream from accidental contact. Amara didn't scream. The blood touched her palm and changed. Instead of burning, it cooled, spreading across her skin like liquid silver, branching into delicate lines that formed a perfect star with 5 points. The mark glowed softly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Every torch in the great hall suddenly flared brighter, their flames leaping upward as if pulled by invisible strings, as if bowing. Darius descended the stairs in 2 bounds and knelt before her, taking her small hand in both of his. The star mark shimmered between them, neither painful nor fading, permanent, undeniable. "Blood answers blood," he whispered, his voice cracked with wonder. "The old magic, the binding that can't be forged or faked." He looked up at her, tears streaking his pale face. "You truly are mine, my daughter, my child." Amara stared at the mark, then at him. "Does it mean I'm like you now?" "No," Darius said gently. "It means you're something new, something better." The bridge the prophecy promised. A commotion erupted from the corridor, running feet, urgent voices. Renz appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, his thin face stricken. "Your Majesty, forgive me." "But you must know," he swallowed hard. "The Council's watchers aren't just here. They've had eyes on Lillian Wells for years. If you claim the child openly, if you invoke royal protection, Marcellus will strike at the mother first. He'll use her to draw the girl out." Darius stood, his expression hardening into something terrible and kingly. "Then we bring Lillian here. Tonight now," he turned to the guards. "Summon my fastest night riders. Send them to—" He looked at Amara. "Where is your home?" "The beggar's quarter," Amara said quietly. "Thornwick Alley, the blue door with the cracked step. Thornwick Alley." Darius repeated to the guards, "Bring Lillian Wells to Valon under full escort. Tell her," he hesitated, "tell her the king requests her presence. Tell her it concerns her daughter's safety. Nothing more." The guards bowed and vanished. Darius knelt before Amara again and spoke with formal precision. Each word weighted with ancient power by the old law and the covenant of stone. "I claim you, Amara Wells, as ward of House Valon. My roof is your shelter. My blade is your shield. My life stands between you and all who would do you harm." His ember eyes burned. "Do you accept this protection?" Amara understood somehow that this was more than words. This was magic, binding and unbreakable. She nodded. "I accept." The star mark on her palm flared brightly, and somewhere deep in the castle's foundations, something ancient stirred and settled, like a great beast acknowledging a new truth. "Good," Darius said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Now we wait for your mother and we prepare." "Prepare for what?" Amara asked. "For the council for Morelli's," for he stopped in the sudden silence. Amara heard it too, a sound she'd learned from the castle. A sense Darius had been teaching her in quiet moments, the way stone breathed, the way wind moved through corridors, the way the very bones of Valaman shifted and settled. Something was wrong. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. Darius tilted his head, listening with senses far sharper than human. His eyes widened. "Get behind me now." The explosion came from the eastern courtyard, a sound like thunder trapped in stone, followed by screams and the clash of steel. The floor trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. Guards burst into the hall, weapons drawn. "Your Majesty, the outer wall, it's been breached." Multiple hostiles bearing Marcellus colors. Darius drew his sword, the blade singing as it cleared the scabbard. Old steel, dark and deadly. How many? At least 20. They came with explosives and siege equipment. "They're not here to talk, my lord." Darius looked down at Amara, at the star mark glowing on her palm, at the face so like Lillian's it made his heart fracture. "They're not waiting until midnight," he said quietly. "They're taking you now." Another explosion shook the castle. Closer this time. "Stay with me," Darius commanded, pulling Amara behind him as he strode toward the sound of battle. "And whatever happens, whatever you see me become, remember that monsters are choices, not teeth." The great doors of the hall burst open, and the night poured in with steel and fury. The attacking force didn't breach the inner halls. Darius's guards met them in the courtyard with a ferocity that turned the night into a canvas of steel and shadow. But the message was clear. Marcellus wasn't coming to negotiate. He was coming to take what he believed belonged to the council. By the time the skirmish ended with the attackers either dead or fleeing into the night, Darius had made his decision. "Summon everyone," he commanded, standing in the blood-spattered courtyard with Amara tucked safely behind him. Every noble, every counselor, every vampire standing within a night's ride. "Send word to the territories. I'm invoking an ancient rite." His captain stared at him. "My lord, are you certain? Once invoked, it cannot be withdrawn." "I'm certain," Darius said coldly. "Let Marcellus come with his accusations and his fear. We'll meet him with a law older than his hatred." By the following midnight, the grand hall had been transformed. Every candelabra blazed with light. The marble floors gleamed like black mirrors, and the hall was packed with witnesses, vampire nobles in their ancient finery, lesser lords clutching ceremonial weapons, scholars from the archives, and guards lining every wall. At the center, on a raised dais, sat the throne of Valamal, iron and stone crowned with thorns. Darius stood before it, not sitting, his hand resting on Amara's shoulder. The child wore a simple velvet dress, hastily provided by the castle seamstresses. Deep midnight blue that made her pale hair shine like starlight. The star mark on her palm was visible to everyone, glowing softly in the candle light. Behind them, Lillian's portrait had been moved to the dais, a silent witness to the proceedings. The great doors opened with a groan of ancient hinges. Elder Marcellus entered like winter-aid flesh. He was tall and gaunt, his face all sharp angles and aristocratic contempt. His robes were white, the color of council authority, edged in silver thread that caught the light like frozen lightning. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless, and burned with the certainty of the righteous. Behind him came a retinue of council guards, their armor black and polished to a killing shine. The crowd parted as he walked, some bowing, others watching with barely concealed fear. Marcellus stopped 10 paces from the dais and inclined his head, just barely, the minimum respect owed to a king. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice smooth and cold as a blade drawn from ice. "You've summoned us under ancient rite. A grave matter, I presume." "Grave enough," Darius replied. "I invoke trial by truth, the old law that binds us all, council and crown alike. All testimony given here tonight is bound by blood and magic. Lies spoken under this covenant turn to ash on the tongue. Do you acknowledge the law?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Trial by truth hadn't been Invoked in over a century, it was a relic from the early days when vampire law was enforced by magic rather than might. Marcellus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes. "I acknowledge it," he said slowly, "as must you, your majesty. What is spoken here cannot be unsaid." "Good," Darius said. He gestured to Amara. "Then let me present Amara Wells, daughter of Lillian Wells, a mortal woman who was taken from my protection 6 years ago. A woman I loved, a woman who carried my child." The hall erupted in gasps and furious whispers. Several nobles clutched their weapons. Others stared at the child with expressions ranging from horror to fascination. Martellus laughed, a thin, bitter sound. "Your Majesty confesses to the very weakness that endangers our kind. You bred with a mortal, breaking the oldest taboo, and now present the abomination as if it were a treasure." He pointed at Amara. "That child is the bridgeborn of the prophecy, a threat to every vampire in this kingdom. She must be surrendered to the council for testing and appropriate measures." "Testing," Darius repeated, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You mean execution, I mean protection." Marcellus said smoothly, "Protection of our way of life, protection from the prophecy that promises our destruction." Amara stepped forward, slipping from beneath Darius's hand before he could stop her. She looked so small in that vast hall, surrounded by predators in human form, but her voice rang out clear and fearless. "Is the truth scary for you?" The hall went utterly silent, Marcellus's pale eyes fixed on her. "What did you say, child?" "You're scared," Amara said simply. "You talk about protection and testing, but really you're just scared. Because the prophecy says someone like me might change things, might make people stop being afraid of you." She tilted her head. "Is that why you took my mama, because you were scared?" Murmur that ran through the crowd was different now. Uncertain, questioning, Darius reached into his cloak and withdrew the silver locket, holding it up so the candle light caught it. "This locket was my betrothal gift to Lillian Wells. She wore it the night she vanished." He looked at Markellis. "Trial by truth, elder, tell this assembly. Did you have knowledge of Lillian Wells's disappearance?" Marcellus's jaw tightened. "I knew she was removed. Yes, for the good of— Did you order it?" A pause. Markellis's hands clenched at his sides. "The decision was made by the council collectively." "Liar." Renz's voice rang out. The steward stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the wall, his face pale but determined. "Under trial by truth, I testify. Elder Marcellus came to me 6 years ago. He ordered me to arrange Lillian Wells's capture. He said she carried a child of twilight, a bridgeborn, and that both mother and child needed to be hidden where the king could never find them. He said it was necessary to protect the council's power." Marcellus turned on Ren with fury blazing in his colorless eyes. "You betray your oath." "My oath is to the truth," Ren said, voice shaking but holding firm. "Not to you." Marcellus raised his hand and power rippled through the hall. Subtle, insidious, the kind of compulsion that worked on minds like fingers on puppet strings. Several nobles swayed, their eyes glazing over. Whispers of agreement began to spread. "The council must be obeyed. The child is dangerous. Surrender her." Amara felt it too, a cold pressure against her thoughts, trying to make her doubt, to make her afraid. She looked down at the star mark on her palm. It pulsed once, bright and hot, and the compulsion shattered like ice struck by summer sun. The nobles blinked, shaking their heads as if waking from dreams. Marcellus staggered back a step, shock cracking through his composed expression. "Blood answers blood," Darius said quietly, looking at Marcellus with something like pity. "You can't compel her. You can't control her. She's everything the prophecy promised, and she's mine to protect." Marcellus opened his mouth to respond, his face twisted with rage and desperation. The great doors swung open, every head turned. A woman stood in the entrance, flanked by Darius's night riders, her dress simple and worn, her pale hair unbound and flowing over her shoulders. She was thin, trembling slightly, her face marked by illness and hardship, but her eyes, storm gray and blazing, were fixed on the portrait behind the throne. Lillian Wells had come home. Lillian took 3 steps into the grand hall and stopped, her gaze locked on the portrait as if nothing else existed. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words that wouldn't come. One hand rose to her throat, fingers searching for something that wasn't there. Then finding the locket's chain beneath her worn collar, "Mama," Amara broke from Darius's side and ran across the marble floor, her small feet echoing in the frozen silence. Lillian dropped to her knees and caught her daughter, clutching her so tightly Amara gasped. "Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" Her voice cracked with fear and exhaustion. "The writers said you were in danger, that I had to come." "I'm okay," Amara whispered. "Mama, I'm okay, but you need to see." Marcelli's moved with predatory speed, crossing the hall in a blur of white robes. "Lillian Wells," he said, his voice dripping with false kindness as he extended his hand toward her. "How good of you to join us. Come, let me help you understand." Power radiated from his outstretched fingers, compulsion thick as fog, reaching for Lillian's mind like claws draped in silk. Amara felt it, felt the cold magic trying to wrap around her mother's thoughts, trying to bury truth under layers of manufactured calm and manufactured forgetting. "No," she said, stepping between them. The star mark on her palm blazed like a newborn sun. The compulsion struck the light and shattered, fragmenting into 1,000 glittering pieces that dissolved like snow touched by flame. The backlash hit Martellus like a physical blow, sending him stumbling backward with a hiss of pain, and in Lillian's mind, something broke, or rather, something that had been broken for 6 years suddenly healed. She gasped, hands flying to her temples, and memories flooded back, not gently, not slowly, but all at once like a dam bursting, moonlight filtering through ancient trees, a clearing filled with night-blooming roses. Darius kneels before her, his ember eyes soft and vulnerable, offering a ring hidden inside a silver locket. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Choose me, choose us." Her hands in his hair, pulling him close. Yes, always, yes. Walking home through the forest at dawn, the locket warm against her heart, planning how to tell her family, how to explain loving something the world called monster. A hand clamping over her mouth, cloth pressed to her face, bitter and chemical, chloroform, the scent of it drowning her protests, waking in darkness, stone walls, chains, a voice like winter, Marcellus's voice, explaining with cruel patience, "The child you carry cannot be allowed to exist, but killing a king's beloved would start a war, so you'll be kept alive but emptied, your memories taken, your past erased. You'll raise the child in poverty and ignorance, and when the time comes, we'll collect what you've grown for us." Magic like ice spreading through her mind, memories freezing, cracking, falling away like snow from a roof. The last thing she remembered before the darkness took her completely was Darius's face. Lillian's eyes snapped open, clear and blazing with 6 years of stolen truth. She looked past Amara, past the assembled nobles directly at Marcelli's. "You," she breathed, the word sharp as a blade. "You took me, you stole my life, you buried my memories and left me with nothing." But her voice broke. Nothing but just enough to raise her alone, to keep her safe for you to harvest. The hall erupted in gasps and furious murmurs. Nobles turned to stare at Marcellus, hands drifting toward weapons. Even his own guards looked uncertain. "Lies," Morella spat, but his composure was cracking like ice in spring. "The woman is confused, influenced by the child's unnatural trial by truth." Darius's voice cut through the chaos like a sword through silk. He descended from the days, moving with lethal grace. "Agreed to its terms, Marcellus." Lies turned to ash on the tongue. "So speak. Did you order Lillian Wells taken? Did you have her memories stripped? Did you plan to kill her child once the prophecy revealed itself?" Marcellus's mouth opened. No words came out, only a thin stream of gray ash that spilled from his lips like sand. The whole went deathly silent. The elder clawed at his throat, trying to speak, but only more ash emerged. The magic of trial by truth had judged him and found him wanting. Lillian stood slowly, Amara still pressed against her side. She looked at Darius for the first time since entering, really looked at him, and her face crumpled with recognition and grief and hope and fury all tangled together. "Darius," she whispered. He stood frozen. This ancient king who'd faced armies in centuries, undone by a single word spoken by the woman he'd mourned for 6 years. "Lillian," Managed, I looked for you. I never stopped. I know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I remember all of it. Amara looked between them, her mother and the vampire king, the mortal and the immortal, the two halves of the prophecy that had made her, and felt something settle in her chest, warm and ripe and whole. Then Marcellus moved, ash still falling from his lips, face twisted with desperate rage. He lunged toward Amara with a blade drawn from his robes, silver and cruel, meant for killing things that shouldn't exist. If I can't have the child, he snarled through the ash. No one will. Steel flashed, shouts erupted, Lillian screamed. Darius was already moving, sword singing as it cleared its sheath, but he was 3 steps too far. Amara's bare feet touched the cold marble floor, and something ancient stirred in the stone beneath Valaman Castle. Something that recognized her blood, her heritage, her right to stand in this hall. Vines burst through the cracks between marble tiles. Night-blooming roses, thorned and wild, growing with impossible speed, they erupted around Amara in a protective circle, their stems thick as a man's wrist, their thorns like silver daggers. Marcellus' lunge ended with thorns piercing through his robes, pinning his wrists and ankles, holding him suspended like a butterfly on display. The grand hall plunged into chaos, nobles shouting, guards drawing weapons, magic crackling through the air like lightning before a storm. And at the center of it all stood a 6-year-old girl with roses at her feet and starlight in her palm, teaching an ancient castle what it meant to defend what it loved. The thorns held Marcellus suspended, his silver blade fallen and clattering across the marble. He struggled against the vines, but each movement only drove the thorns deeper. The roses pulsed with Amara's heartbeat, drinking his strength, not his blood, not his life, but the ancient power that made him what he was. "Release me," Marcellus hissed, his pale eyes wild. "You don't understand what you're protecting. That child will destroy everything we've built, everything you've built on fear," Darius corrected, his sword still drawn, its dark blade gleaming in the candle light. He moved closer, each step deliberate and deadly, on lies, on stolen lives and buried truths. Marcellus wrenched one arm partially free, thorns tearing through his white robes, leaving crimson streaks. With a burst of desperate strength, he ripped himself loose and lunged. Not for Amara this time, but for Darius. His hands curled into claws edged with centuries of refined killing technique. Steel met flesh with a sound like breaking bells. They fought among the pillars of the grand hall, 2 ancient predators, their movements too fast for mortal eyes to follow. Darius's blade sang old songs of war, forms perfected before kingdoms had names. Marcellus fought with claws and speed, and the vicious certainty of someone who had nothing left to lose. Sparks flew where claws met steel, the stone cracked where bodies slammed against pillars. The watching nobles pressed back against the walls, some cheering, others silent with terror. Lillian pulled Amara close, shielding her daughter's eyes, but Amara watched anyway, watched as the vampire king fought not for power or pride, but for the right to protect what he loved. Darius drove Marcellus back step by step until the elder's shoulders hit the base of the throne's dais. The king's blade came to rest against Marcellus's throat, pressed just hard enough to dimple the skin without breaking it. "I have the right," Darius said quietly, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "By ancient law, by trial, by truth, by your own attack on one under my protection, I have the right to take your head." Marcellus smiled bitterly, ash still clinging to his lips. "Then do it. Prove you're still the monster." They crowned. Darius held the blade steady for a long moment. Every vampire in the hall watched, waiting to see what their king would choose. Then he lowered the sword. "No," he said, "monsters are what our choices make us, and I choose mercy not for your sake. As a lesson for this court." He turned to address the assembled nobles. "Elder Marcellus is hereby stripped of rank and title. He will be exiled to the bone mines of the northern wastes, where he will serve out his immortality in darkness and solitude. Let him have centuries to reflect on what his fear cost." A collective exhale moved through the crowd, relief, surprise, grudging respect. Marcellus sagged against the dais, the fight draining out of him like water through cracked stone. Guards moved forward to take him, and he went without resistance, his white robes now stained with blood and torn by thorns. As they led him toward the doors, he looked back once at Amara. "The prophecy," he whispered, "it cannot be stopped. She will break everything." "Good," Lillian said fiercely, her arm tight around her daughter. "Your everything deserves to be broken." The doors closed behind Marcellus with a final echoing boom. Darius stood alone on the dais, his sword still in hand, his iron crown slightly askew. He looked at Amara, this small child who'd brought roses to his gate and torn his carefully ordered world apart. And slowly, deliberately, he knelt. The entire hall gasped. A king did not kneel, not to anyone, not ever. "Amara Wells," Darius said, his voice formal but threaded with emotion that made it crack. "Child of Lillian, bearer of the twilight vein, daughter of my blood and heart, do you wish to be known as mine, not by force or prophecy, but by choice?" Amara looked up at her mother. Lillian's face was wet with tears, but she was smiling, really smiling for the first time in 6 years. She nodded. Amara stepped forward and placed her small hand in Darius's much larger one. The star mark on her palm flared bright, and his blood bond answered with light of its own. "I do," Amara said clearly. "I choose you. I choose us." The moment her words filled the hall, something shifted in the very bones of Valon Castle. High above in the vaulted ceiling, a seam of stained glass that had been sealed since the castle's founding began to glow. Ancient hinges that hadn't moved in centuries groaned and shifted. Window cracked open just slightly, just enough. A ribbon of dawn light slanted through the opening, soft and golden and impossibly gentle. It fell across the marble floor like a blessing, illuminating the roses at Amara's feet, touching the edges of Darius's cloak, painting Lillian's hair with fire. The vampires in the hall flinched, raising hands to shade their eyes from light they'd been taught to fear, but no one burned, no one turned to ash. The dawn that touched them was warm but not cruel, more like moonlight's sister than an executioner's flame. The prophecy, someone whispered. "Bridgeborn brings the gentle dawn." Darius rose, still holding Amara's hand, and turned to face his court. When he spoke, his voice rang with the authority of a king who just chosen hope over fear. "Hear me, vassals of Valmont. I hereby grant Lillian Wells full sanctuary within these walls, and restore to her all that was stolen. I claim Amara Wells as ward and heir under the old law, not as property, but as a family chosen freely." He paused, letting that sink in. "And I decree that henceforth this kingdom will be ruled not by fear, but by covenant, not by compulsion, but by consent." Looked up at the ribbon of dawn still streaming through the window. "At sunrise we will open the eastern gates. Any who wish to witness a new age, mortal or immortal, subject or stranger, may come. We will show this realm that night and day can share the same sky." The hall erupted in voices, some cheering, some uncertain, some afraid, but beneath it all was something new, something that hadn't existed in Valamont for centuries. Hope. The eastern parapet had never known sunrise. For 200 years its tall windows had been sealed with iron shutters and ancient magic, protecting the castle inhabitants from the one thing that could unmake them. But as the first pale hint of dawn touched the horizon, those shutters groaned open, commanded by a king's decree and a child's gentle power. The parapeties filled with witnesses. Nobles in their finery stood shoulder to shoulder with castle servants. Mortal guests from the city clutched the hands of vampire courtiers. Scholars from the archives pressed forward, wanting to record this moment in their endless chronicles. And at the center of it all, silhouetted against the lightning sky, stood Darius, Lillian, and Amara. The sun rose slowly, painting the clouds gold and rose and amber. Its light crept across the courtyard, climbed the castle walls, and finally, impossibly spilled through the open windows onto the parapet stone floor. The vampires tensed, centuries of instinct screaming at them to flee. But the light that touched them was soft as candle light, warm but not burning. It was illuminated rather than destroyed. Several nobles gasped. One elderly vampire who'd lived through 3 dynasties sank to his knees and wept. "The gentle dawn," someone whispered. The prophecy was true. Darius stepped into the light, fully letting it wash over his pale skin. He did not burn, did not smoke. He simply stood there, iron crown catching the sun's rays, and raised Amara's hand in his. Behold, he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd and beyond, to the city that spread below Valamont's walls. Amara Wells, bridgeborn of prophecy, daughter of mortal and immortal, ward of House Valamont, and heir to all I hold. He looked down at her, and for the first time in 2 centuries his smile was not weighted by sorrow. Let it be known throughout the realm, this kingdom is no longer ruled by fear or compulsion, but by covenant and consent. We do not command our subjects, we serve them. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some murmuring in disbelief, but all transfixed by the sight of a vampire king standing in dawn's light with a human child at his side. Lillian stood slightly apart, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming freely down her face. Darius caught her eye and extended his other hand. She took it without hesitation, and the 3 of them stood together as the sun climbed higher, a family forged, not by tradition or law, but by choice. Later, when the crowds had dispersed and the castle had settled into a strange new peace, the 3 of them returned to the great hall. The portrait of Lillian still hung in its gilded frame, illuminated now, not just by candles, but by morning light streaming through high windows. Amara stood before it, studying her mother's painted face. "Are you going to take it down?" she asked. Darius and Lillian exchanged glances. "Do you want us to?" Lillian asked gently. Amara shook her head. "It's sad, but it's also beautiful. It's proof that even when bad things happen, love doesn't disappear. It just waits. Then we'll leave it," Darius said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not as a monument to sorrow, but as a promise that truth, no matter how long buried, will find its way back to light." Lillian knelt beside Amara, brushing a strand of pale hair from her daughter's face. "Do you know why I named you Amara?" The girl shook her head. "It means eternal in an old tongue," Lillian said softly. "I didn't remember why I chose it. I couldn't remember anything, but something in me knew that you were meant to last, that you would be stronger than time, stronger than forgetting." She smiled through fresh tears. "I named you for forever, even when I couldn't remember what forever looked like." Darius knelt on Amara's other side, completing the circle. "And the roses," he said, "the night-blooming roses you brought to my gate. Do you know their story?" Amara shook her head again, eyes wide with curiosity. "They were created by an ancient gardener who wanted to prove that beauty could exist in darkness." Darius explained that creatures of night deserved something lovely to call their own. "Your mother cultivated them in the forest, in the clearing where we met. She believed that anything that could bloom in shadow could bloom anywhere, that darkness and light weren't enemies, just different kinds of home." He reached out and touched one of the painted roses in the portrait's frame. "You brought those roses back to me, Amara, and with them you brought everything I'd lost." Amara looked from her mother to Darius. These 2 people who'd loved each other across impossible distances, who'd been torn apart by fear and found each other through her courage. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked quietly. "The council, the people who are afraid." "Some will never accept this," Darius said honestly.